1 Samuel 8 takes us to a new unit within the book. For the next several chapters, the theme will be shifting to monarchy, that is, kingship. For much of its history, Israel has been a theocracy. This means that God was the ruler of the people. Yahweh was the final arbiter and the one who oversaw the nation. And in fact, we are told numerous times in the Torah that God also fought for the Israelites in battle. Now, Israel will become a monarchy. This means that one human ruler, that is a king or a monarch, will oversee the nation. The king will lead the nation to battle, ensure the safety of the people, and command considerable authority over the day-to-day operations of the government. On the one hand, this is a natural progression. Most societies in the ancient world eventually turned to running their governments by means of a king whose throne was inherited by the oldest son. But Israel's desire to be like the other nations is more than just a sociological innovation, it is also a spiritual condition. According to the chapter at hand, it is emblematic of a people that no longer trust their God. This nation wants to be like the nations around them, who put their trust and faith in a powerful king that protects its borders and guards its safety. So, let's get started. There are two things that I want to highlight in this chapter. First, the demand for a king indicates lack of trust. Second, God gives the people what they want. To begin with, the demand for a king indicates a breakdown in trust. Notice that when the people of Israel ask Samuel for a king, God immediately replies as follows: "It is not you they have rejected me as their king." The author of the book of Samuel is focusing on the ongoing lack of trust among the people. This distrust goes back deep into Israel's history, and in fact it goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. As we are told in the 3rd chapter in Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, it was Adam and Eve's desire to be like God that ushered in the world as we know it. One where sin reigns, where trust is hard to come by, and where the focus is on ourselves. It is a world where we strive to take the place of God. This should help us gain perspective here. We are not talking about an isolated example that only affected Israelites of the past or at one specific point in time. Instead, we are talking about the human race in virtually all of its history. We, as human beings, are trapped in a never-ending cycle of being discontent, of never consistently being happy with our lot in life. When it comes to Israel, they actually have a reason for their despair. Samuel, like his spiritual father Eli before him, had sons that were unfaithful to the Lord. So when they were put in charge of the community after Samuel became too old, the people complained of their wickedness. Samuel's sons were corrupt, and they were perverting justice. People living today can absolutely empathize with this thinking. We want our rulers to be honest, to be fair, to be just, and to always be focused on the greater good of the people and never on themselves. At the same time, if we take seriously the notion that God is actively working in our lives and that God truly cares about us, then we need to strike a balance between trusting that God has our best interest in mind while also actively ensuring that our rulers are fair-minded, even-handed, and living up to the expectations that God has for them. From the perspective of ancient Israel, their demand for a king implies that they had become like every other people around them. The rulers pleaded, "There must be a king over us so that we can be like all the other nations." Now, there was nothing necessarily wrong with having a human ruler. The problem was that the people wanted a human ruler just so that they could be like everyone else. The second point I want to highlight from this chapter is that God gives the people what they want. In spite of Israel's motives, and perhaps very surprisingly, God does not refuse or dismiss their request. On the contrary, God quickly complies with their demand and urges Samuel to explain the seriousness of their desire. Yahweh tells Samuel to paint a very vivid picture of what it's actually like to have a king and to be under the king's authority. In the ancient Near East, this essentially means that the king is a despot or a tyrant. Under the guise of military safety, the king will enlarge his coffers, substantially taxing the people, taking money for himself, for his entourage, and making use of people however he so chooses. In this way, a monarchy in the ancient world is very different from a democracy in the modern world. To be sure, some democratically elected people today are certainly corrupt and attempt to pervert justice. However, they are usually limited by other checks and balances, such as the law and people, and by term limits. However, in the ancient Near East, kings essentially had absolute power. And one of the main things that they did with their absolute power was to conquer foreign lands and enlarge their borders. As verse 20 states, "We want a king who will judge us and go out before us and fight our battles." This leads us to a question that is much bigger than our chapter at hand. Have you ever received something you asked for only to later realize you actually didn't want it? I know I have. I can think of many things in my own life that I thought I wanted or I thought I needed. However, once I got them, I was very disappointed. One of the things I like about this chapter in our study of 1 Samuel is its ability to bring me face to face with my own level of unhappiness and discontent. For instance, it's easy for me to blame God when things go wrong, or to blame others when I don't want to take responsibility, or to strive for things that ultimately will not bring me happiness. In this story, the nation of Israel shows that it is not content with God, and this discontent will cause it to sacrifice its own welfare, its wealth, its people, and its resources for something it really does not want after all is said and done: a tyrant. As we conclude our study of this chapter, let's consider the consequences of Israel's actions and decisions so that we do not fall victim to the same mentality. To be sure, this is a lifelong process, and we will have many bumps along the way. But it's important to keep track of our own heart and our own happiness, and the things that we learn here can be used to help us make better decisions in the future. In the meantime, enjoy your reading of 1 Samuel chapter 8.